Sorry, Morgan Stanley. Apologize in advance. I'm holding, dollars on chain and I'm getting 10% yield. My bank gives me like 0.5%. So why would I ever go back to my bank? All your costs are in Filipino peso because you're producing in the Philippines, but now your revenue is in Mexican peso, right? And so what you would want to do is knowing when you get those future cash flows, you would basically buy a hedge. Whatever you get, you pay a small fee for basically making sure that the money you get is what you expect. So the product that you would be buying on chain is a structured product, which basically, having lived through the 2008 financial crisis, I worry about that a little bit, right? Like real estate all coming on chain sounds great, but only if there's a way to do it sort of in a way that doesn't kind of create another Armageddon.
I am very happy to be with Rene. He's the co-founder of Celo. Such a great chat with you earlier on stage.
Likewise, yeah, it's good to chat more.
You talked about stable coins a lot, and I think that is a topic that a lot of traditional finance people are just realizing. Why are they just catching up now?
Yeah, good question. I wonder about that.
Yeah.
I think the reason why it took so long, if I had to sort of make a guess, is really because all the supporting infrastructure wasn't quite ready for a regular person to easily on-ramp, as we say, so kind of go from their kind of normal currency, either in a bank account or like a mobile money account, to come on chain and then also easily go back, off-ramp, kind of go back into their local currency. Just wasn't something that for many years was easy from a sort of UX perspective, but then it also wasn't something that was very, very cost efficient, right? So you would lose a lot of money coming on chain and then also offboarding again. And I think in 2025, we are finally at a point where really in most markets around the world, that's now possible. And it's happening fast, it's easy. It's something that really regular people that have not ever used crypto can do. And I think that's a big reason why we're seeing more mass market appeal now for stablecoins and sort of this becoming part of the public conversation. I think another factor is that there's now, in 2025, there's a lot more interesting application. 5 years ago, what could you really do on chain? I mean, not that much, right? There wasn't really, you could send a token to another person, great. I think in 2025, we have, prediction markets going mainstream. We have, games that, have token economies that have pretty big user bases. We have all kinds of on-chain applications where people want to actually use them, and so they have a much bigger sort of incentive to take that more difficult step of on-ramping.
You don't think it's because of Trump? He's a big
Trump
part of this.
Definitely is a reason. I mean, definitely kind of created so much awareness, and I agree. I mean, meme coins, of course, brought a lot of people also, right? This is their first interaction. So I think actually there's a nice way of kind of tying even some of the experiments like meme coins and NFTs into this journey, right? Because all of this helped to actually bring people, into a world where they now have a wallet and they realize, oh wow, I'm holding dollars on chain and I'm getting 10% yield. My bank gives me 0.5%. So why would I ever go back to my bank, right? So I think there's certainly some of that, and I think all of that helped kind of make stablecoins sort of explode, as we say, this year.
For users, right? Meme coins or online gaming, those are a small number of users if you compare to the world's population.
Yes.
But I think the legislation and the law in place actually introduced this to everybody else that wasn't really interested in this. It sounds like such an important topic that governments should be working on, but a lot of very conservative governments are still just watching, observing. And my worry is that they're going to be so far behind.
Yeah, no, and I think this is sometimes what we're seeing in crypto, right? Like the users start doing stuff, and there's a little bit of maybe even gray area, right, where it's not really clear how does this fall into existing laws.
Yeah.
But then it becomes so big that in some cases it's actually nice. It educates regulators, right? It gives them a sense for, are consumers sufficiently protected, right? Probably also helps create better laws, right? Versus trying to put laws now for something that may or may not happen in the future, and how would you know how people are going to interact with these stablecoins, right? Now we know because we have like years of history of seeing that. But I think to many of us it was clear from the very get-go that stablecoins are going to be big. And even now I think, like we talked about on the panel, we're still early innings, right? We're still mostly dollar stablecoins. It's still not much composability beyond sort of some of these initial kind of use cases. So the best is yet to come, I think, as it comes to stablecoins.
你知道三大美股指数都有自己的个性吗？纳斯达克它就是科技股的大将军，你喜欢的科技啊 AI 半导体都在里面，波动最大。那标普500呢就是比较稳定的，什么产业都有，它代表的是整个美国的经济，机构最爱配置它。道琼它就是老字号的大公司，波动最小。那每一个人喜欢投资的指数呢是完全不一样，不过都一样的是呢，你在 Bitget 的 TradFi 不用开美国的券商账户，不用换汇电汇，只要用 USDT 就可以交易美股代币，支援杠杆做多做空。现在 Bitget 它的 TradFi 黄金交易赛开跑了，交易黄金就可以参加，总奖池呢有超过10万美金，活动到2月19号，细节放在资讯栏，赶快去研究一下。
So everyone has that special edge. What is yours?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, especially in 2025 when you have so many more chains like launch, that say, hey, we're like this chain for stablecoins, right? At the end of the day, I think it's easy to launch a chain. Really, in 2025, it's probably never been easier to launch a blockchain. But I think what a lot of people, even founders, right, that start blockchains underestimate is the kind of infrastructure you have to build around the blockchain, right? And that's everything from what we talked about, the on and off ramps. It's like different sort of infrastructure, right, that projects want to tie in to actually make this stuff useful. And so it's one thing to launch a chain and have a bunch of like TVL on it, like people just moving some tokens in. It's another to actually have the blockchain be used for economic activity, right? And so in the case of the Philippines, it really only makes sense if the person that then kind of receives, that stablecoin in their wallet can do something with it, right? Can they off-ramp? Can they use it to pay at a local store? There's an example. Recently, a friend was traveling to Kenya, Nairobi, and it was like, hey, you go there a lot. Like, what's your what do I need to know? And it's like, you know what? Until like maybe a year ago, I would have said, okay, when you get to the airport, buy a local SIM card, get M-Pesa because you'll need that to pay at all the local stores. This time I was like, look, just use MiniPay. Use Opera's kind of wallet because you can actually use it anywhere M-Pesa is accepted, and you can have your USDT stablecoin in it and just pay with that really anywhere. So no. Really, it couldn't be easier, right? And
I need you to help me visualize how that works. You said it's on a browser, an app, or what is it?
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. So yesterday here we announced that with Opera we're basically doubling down on this partnership, and it started in the browser. You're right. So Opera has I think 300 million active users, has brought hundreds of millions of people online through their browsers. Their Android browser is actually the most popular browser in Africa. And so it's so popular because they subsidize bandwidth. It's also super lightweight, so it doesn't take a lot of data to kind of download, right? So people really love it, right? Makes a lot of sense. So they built a wallet directly into that Android browser. Mm-hmm. And after they launched it, it became so popular, and people were like, hey, I wanna use this too, but I'm not in Africa on an Android phone. So they ended up also launching a standalone Android and iOS wallet for MiniPay. So now really anyone anywhere can use MiniPay and use it to send funds or use any of the many mini apps in MiniPay. It's becoming kind of a way for any Opera user, whether they're on iOS or Android, right, to easily have access to a wallet.
So what you are saying is, if I were to go to Kenya on vacation right now, I just have to download? And when I pay the vendors, do I send stablecoins?
Yes.
And they all sort of...
So there's a local provider that's basically managing the flow so that the vendor still gets paid as they would otherwise. But for you as a user, all you're doing is you're effectively paying in the stablecoin in your wallet. You set it up, you have your wallet, and then you can make payments based on phone numbers, so you don't even have to deal with public keys. In the case of like, M-Pesa in Kenya, they have like these kind of short kind of codes, right? So that's another way of making a payment. But yeah, it's really, it feels like a Web 2 application because it abstracts everything away that would otherwise be difficult or get in the way when you're using a crypto wallet. There's so many stories of people that now have the ability to, save in dollars or hold gold or send money to, a relative in a market where that's not possible without a big fee previously. And that's, those are the most rewarding stories.
What were you doing before this?
So I started my career, I was actually in traditional finance. So I was at Morgan Stanley structuring derivatives. There's a whole other story there around like stuff that we're not doing on chain yet that I think will happen in the next hopefully 5 years.
Since you're talking about it already.
Do you want to dive in? Okay. So one of sort of the areas that I worked on at Morgan Stanley was basically helping mostly corporates, some sovereigns as well, with sort of their risk management. So, like different interest rates and currencies and structuring derivatives, mostly swaps or swaptions to manage that risk. And the way it works is, from sort of my perspective, I was in the structuring desk. I would think about a product and then I would call up, the euro desk and be like, hey, give me a quote on dollar euro, right? And then, but sometimes for like the more long tail currencies, right, there's thin markets, right? Like not too many people are trading Filipino pesos to Mexican pesos, for example, right? It's not a deep market. Everything goes through dollars, right? And so it's not that efficient. And so it really makes sense if you're setting up like, products for bigger customers, right, where you have some ability to kind of structure things appropriately, but we wouldn't do that kind of work for like a small business, for example, right? It's just not, it doesn't make sense. Fast forward many years now, I'm like, wow, there will be a point in time where the small business can literally buy this product on chain, permissionless, without the need to talk to a bank. So the product that you would be buying on chain is a structured product, which basically, based on the movement of currencies and interest rates, does certain payouts. And so I give an easy example. So you could be a company in the Philippines that actually exports some of their stuff that they're building to Mexico, right? And the company in Mexico is saying, hey, I'm paying you, yes, I'll pay you once I get the goods, right? And so you agree on a price, but during the time that you deliver the goods and they pay you, right, the exchange rate changes, and so you end up, all your costs are in Filipino peso because you're producing in the Philippines, but now your revenue is in Mexican peso, right? And so what do you do, right? And so what you would want to do is knowing when you get those future cash flows, you would basically buy a hedge, right? So that whatever you get, you pay a small fee for basically making sure that the money you get is what you expect. Now this is kind of usually, a big company just calls up their bank or manages that kind of at a portfolio level, right? But for a small company, there's not really a solution to do that, right? And so to do that on chain, well, first of all, we need Mexican peso, Filipino peso, stable coins. We need stable coins for all currencies, right?
Oh, okay.
Right now we only...
I'm getting this. Okay.
Right now we mostly have dollar stable coins, right? So Celo is actually #1 chain for diversity of stablecoins, so having many different stablecoins. So we actually have a Filipino peso that people are using. We have Kenyan shilling. We have a lot of these local currencies because we see a future where, people will want to do that stuff. Now, the volumes in these cross-currency pools, think about it as like a Uniswap pool, but instead of like, Celo wrapped ETH, it's dollar to Kenyan shilling on chain, right?
But the governments have to come up with their own stablecoin for this to happen, though.
It could be that, or like with dollar stablecoins, it's private providers like Tether, Circle, right? Circle actually and Tether too have launched Euro stablecoins as well, right? So there are already examples of existing stablecoin issuers issuing other stablecoins, but then in many markets you actually have local providers. In many markets you have already multiple providers issuing local stablecoins. And so that that is something that's been emerging. We've actually, from the Celo side, supported a lot of these local issuers because we want to see more local stablecoin issuance. There's also synthetic stablecoins, so Mento protocol and Celo is an example of that. There are others. And then the next step is to basically create liquidity in those spot markets so that anyone can easily trade sort of in a spot market between two currencies. And then the next step is to not just do this for spot markets, but for future markets, right? And we're not there yet. No one that's not happening anywhere. I think it's going to happen in the next few years, right? As people now, there's going to be demand for, oh yeah, I want pesos in the future, so I'm, there's on-chain demand for that. So once we have basically fully developed yield curves as a result of these kind of future markets and liquidity in these future markets for these different pairs, I think we'll have something that actually will work better than the traditional financial system, because I think with all the innovation that's been happening around AMMs with DeFi in general, we can create more capital efficient ways of actually allowing people to trade between different currencies. And so my prediction is, I'm going to put myself out there, that in like 5 years' time, it's going to be actually cheaper for a business to do this kind of swap or swaption that they traditionally would have called a big bang for on chain than doing it the traditional way.
You are killing your previous employer.
Yeah. Who would have thought, right?
Right?
Weird. I know. Sorry, Morgan Stanley. Apologize in advance.
I want to know your take on real-world asset. What do you really see happening right now? I've interviewed a few really important guests. They were talking about how T-bills are already on-chain. And I wonder if that is very easy for everyday people to have access to, or is it just for the institutions or companies?
A lot of RWAs exist, but they kind of exist in their own kind of bubble, right? Not that accessible to mainstream, which I think is a big opportunity. I think to date, I think this was also something that we talked about on the panel, right? For the most part, it's just crypto money, on-chain funds providing additional demand for these assets.
Think about a world where all the assets can be transferred. I can transfer half of my house to you right now. That is supposed to be the ideal world, right? It sounds like there'll be a lot of things trying to stop you or stop that.
Definitely, having lived through the 2008 financial crisis, I worry about that a little bit, right? Like, you imagine people like real estate all coming on chain sounds great, but only if there's a way to do it sort of in a way that doesn't kind of create another Armageddon, right? Where suddenly people, take out, or like use it as Aave collateral and then, take out loans against it, lever up, and don't necessarily understand sort of the financial risks that go hand in hand with that. So that is something that gives me some pause, right? But look, giving someone in the global south access to like Google or Apple stock, I think that's totally like overdue, right? And so I think it depends a little bit on what product are we talking, what asset are we talking about, what are maybe the consumer protections around how it's used on chain. But yeah, I think that's for us to figure out.
Last question is, maybe help us imagine this beautiful world in 10 years. How would the transaction of value look like?
10 years is a long time.
Yeah, enough time.
Yeah. I mean, there's also everything that's been happening with AI, right? Where I think probably in 10 years, the way we interact, is going to change pretty dramatically, right? So maybe it's no longer an app on your phone, but you just, like talk to an LLM and it's doing stuff on your behalf, right? That's definitely coming. And so I think 10 years from now, we probably have a large part of on-chain transactions being agentic or being agent-driven. I do think we'll probably, just have something where we speak into some form of device, right? And we know it's kind of acting based on some preferences that, the system knows it's what we kind of want or need, and like that all works seamlessly. But I don't know, 10 years, it's
It's
very
a long
hard.
time.
That's a long time, yeah.
And I am super excited about what could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we're all here. Thank you so much for
Bonnie,
this
this is so
conversation.
great. Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
so much. Yeah.